Hey guys, so I want to say right off the bat that I'm using a different editor today. Don't be scared by it. It'll work just fine. The only reason I'm using this is that, first of all, I want to try out something new, but also the output is going to happen right below my coding window, and so I think that that just might be a little bit easier for me to demo for you how to program. The name of this editor is called Wing IDE 101. It's Wing IDE 101 and it's version 6. You can get that at home if you like. So we already did some for loops and we're going to go a little bit further with them today. So I'm going to type out a real quick program and then I want you to just pause the video and think about what you see before I run it. So here's the program. It's a pretty short program. I just want you to think about what the output's going to be if we go to run this. So maybe pause the video, try to figure it out, and then go on ahead to see what it is. Alright, let's run it. Here's the output, and you can see right here it goes 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, all the way up to 1, 5, and then 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, and so on up to 2, 5, and then 3, 1, 3, 2, all the way up to 3, 5. Same thing with the 4s, same thing with the 5s, and then it prints the word done. So what's going on here? Why is it doing that? Well, what we have here is a nested for loop, and that is a for loop inside another for loop. So the first time through the program, we start up here, and we start into the first for loop. Now inside this first for loop, I is going to be counting from 1 up till 5, and it's going to stop on the 6. So the 6 won't execute. So it's going to count from 1 to 5. So the first time through, I is a 1. So I'm going to write that right here. So the first time through, we know that I is 1. And what's the value of k? So while I is 1, k takes on the value of 1 as well. And then we're printing to the screen, remember I is 1 and k is 1, so 1, 1 gets printed to the screen. Well, what happens next? Well, what happens next is k gets its second value, right? Because while I is 1, we have to do all of this code. Well, this code says count from the numbers 1 up to 5. So I is still 1, right? It hasn't changed. But now k is doing its second iteration of this for loop, so now k is 2. So k is 2. And that gets printed to the screen. What happens next? K is 3. I is still 1 though. So I is 1 and k is 3. And then k is 4, and then k is 5. And finally, this for loop is done. But that for loop happened the whole time while I was 1. So it gets down to the end of this and it goes, okay, I need to go to the next part of my I for loop. So now I is 2, and k is 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And then it comes back up to the top. I is 3. And that keeps happening. And so that's why we have this first digit is always our I, and this second digit is our value of k. Now we can do something pretty cool with this. We can type out our times table from 1 times 1 all the way up to 12 times 12 or whatever you think you might want to do. So let's code that very quickly. So we're going to need a range. So for I in range, we're going to go from the number 1, let's say our 12 times table. So we need to go up to 13. And what do we want to do? How do we want to print this? Well, the first thing that I want to do is I want to print which number I'm on. So I'm going to print the value of I. And then I want to print a colon followed by a space. And I don't want to have a space between my number and my colon though. So I'm going to put separation. The separation between the different things is nothing. There's no space in between. And I also don't want to go to the next line. I want it to just say like 1, and then the times table for 1 is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then 2 would be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc. So I don't want to go to a new line yet. So I'm at the end of my line, or at the end of putting this print statement, I'm just going to not put anything there. I'm not going to go to the next line. So the next thing that I need to do is I need to go 1 times 2, 1 times 3, 1 times 4, 1 times 5, all the way up to 1 times 12. And then I need to go 2 times 1, 2 times 2, 2 times 3, all the way up to 12. And then 3 times 1, 3 times 3, all the way up to 12. So I'm going to need another for loop inside here. And I'm going to say use the variable k. for k in range, and I also need to go from 1 up to 12, so 1 to 13, I'm going to print the value of I times k, right? So it'll be 1 times 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, all the way up to 12, and then when I is a 2, then 2 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 12. So I'm going to multiply these two numbers together, but I don't want to go to a new line every time I print this new one. So I'm going to put and equals quote quote so that they'll all be in a row. And then once I'm done printing all of them, then I want to go to a new line, right? So when I'm done my 1 times line, I'm going to go to my 2 times line. So at the end of this, then I want to print, go to a new line. Now all you can say is just print and then print nothing to the screen, and it's just going to go to the next line. There's a shortcut for you. So let's go ahead and run this. Now this looks okay-ish. So my 1 times table are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, but they're all together, and that's kind of ugly. So the reason this is happening is actually that I need to have a space right here, because I'm saying, okay, after I print my multiplication, then don't put anything. So I'm just going to put a little space right here. So after the 1, put a space. After the 2, put a space. That's what's going to end this print statement. So let's run it one more time. And there you go. That looks a whole lot better. And you can see my 1 times table is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And here's my 2 times table up to 12. And you can see I've got everything right up to my 12 times 12, which is 144. Now if I wanted to see a bigger times table, like if I wanted to see my up to 25 times table, well, I would just change this number to a 26, and I would change this number to a 26, and then I can just run it again. And I don't know why you would need this, but here you go. Here's your 1 times 1 all the way up to 25 times 25, which is 625, and there's all of them for you. Now let's write another program that takes 5 integers from the user and adds them up for them, keeps a running total. So first thing we're going to need is we're going to need a variable called total. And I'm going to set it to 0. So right now we have a total of 0 from the user. And I need to ask for 5 numbers. So I'm going to say for I in range 5. So what do I need to do 5 times? Well, I need to get a value from the user. So I'm going to call that value number. The number that they're going to enter is going to be an integer. And I need to get that from the user, and I need to prompt them. Enter an integer. There we go. So they're going to give me a number. And what do I need to do with that number? Well, I need to add that to the total. So how can I do that? Well, I can just say that if I say the total is equal to the number, then every time they enter a new number, it's going to change my value of total to be the same as whatever number they entered. So if they enter a number 3 the first time, my total will be 3. That's great. They've only entered one number. Now if they enter a 5 the next time, well, total is going to just get switched over to a 5. It's not going to add them together. So how I can do that is I can say that total is whatever it was plus the new number. So total is whatever the value of total was plus the new number that they entered. And then it's going to do that 5 times. And at the end of the whole thing, we should have the total of the 5 numbers that they entered. So we can just print the total once we're all done entering those 5 numbers. Let's go ahead and run it. So it says enter an integer. Well, I'll enter the number 1, the number 3, the number 5, the number 2, and the number 3 again. And we're outputting a 14. So 1 plus 3 is 4, plus 5 is 9, plus 2 more is 11, plus 3 is 14. Our code is working pretty good. Now what happens if we were to enter a negative number? So let's run it again. So it says enter an integer, say 10, 10, 10, 10. So we're up to 40. And what if I hit a negative 20? And there we go, we're back down to 20. 40 minus 20 is 20. So it's working pretty good. Now this is just one way to solve this problem. There's actually an easier way to solve this problem. And what we can do is we can first simplify this line right here. I'll show you a trick to this. So instead of saying the total is equal to the total plus the new number, we can just say total plus equals number. And what that means is the total is what it was before plus the new number. Okay, it can't be equals plus, it has to be plus equals. And to prove it to you, let's run this program again. And it says enter an integer 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they do add up to 15. Okay, so plus equals means take this variable and just add this thing to it. But this program can actually be simplified even further. We actually don't need this variable called number. What we need is total. We can do it with one variable. And so what's going to happen here is we can get rid of this line. So we start out with a total of 0, and 5 times we're going to ask the user what is an integer, or enter an integer. They're going to give it to us, and we're going to add that to the total. So one more time, we'll run it. It says enter an integer 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we still get a total of 15. Now this is a pretty efficient way of doing it. Really, this line doesn't matter a whole lot. I'm doing this in 3 or 4 lines of code. If it takes you 5 or 6, that's okay. Your way of doing it might not be quite as efficient, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. Okay, just a couple more programs to go through. Let's say we wanted to ask a user for a number and then print out all of the numbers between 1 and 100 that are divisible by that number. So let's do that. Let's get a number from the user. And so we're going to have to say number, and I'm assuming it's an integer. So number equals int input. Give me a number. And I'm being kind of lazy with my prompts just so that the video isn't too long for you. But give me a number and I will tell you what numbers between 1 and 100 are divisible by that number. That's really what I want to say to the user. But for sake of time, just give me a number. Now I want to say for I in range, I want to go from 1 up to 100. And I only want to print out the number if it's divisible by the number that the user has given us. So for I in range from 1 to 100, if the current number that I'm on, so I'm going to start with 1, then 2, then 3, and I'm going to check them all. If the current number that I'm on, when I divide it by the number that the user gave me, if the remainder is equal to 0, then I can print the number. Otherwise, I don't want to do anything. And actually what I want to do maybe is have them all in a straight line. Otherwise, they're might have to scroll down a whole bunch. So if the number that the user entered, if I divide I by that number and the remainder is 0, it means it must be divisible by the number that the user gave me. And so I'm going to print out that number because it's divisible by the number the user gave me, and then I'm going to just move it over 1. So let's go ahead and run it. It says give me a number. I'll go with a number 5. We should expect 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on. And that's exactly what we get all the way up to 100. So I have one last program up here. And just like we did at the start, I want you to think about what's going to happen when I run this program. So maybe pause the video right now. See if you can write down or type out, or however you want to think of it. See if you can come up with what is the output going to be for this program. Okay, now that you've had a chance to do that, let's run it and see how your predictions compare. So there's some pretty cool output. And just like earlier, what's happening here is I starts out as a 1. So while I is 1, K is counting from 1 up to whatever we're on for our I loop, plus 1 more. So in this case, when I is 1, so it's counting from 1 up to 2, and since it never includes the last number, it's just going to print a 1. So boom, it prints 1, and now I is 2. So K is going to count from 1 up to 2 plus 1 is 3. So from 1 up to 3, it's not going to include the 3, so it'll go with a 1 and a 2. So K prints a 1 and a 2. And then the next time through, K will print 1, 2, and 3, and then 1, 2, 3, and 4, all the way up to 10. And that's the end of this lesson.